senior scientist, Dr. William Thompson, comes forward and says they have known for 14 years that MMR vaccine is causally associated with autism, and they have covered it up.
There is evidence out there. The evidence is there, the science is there, the answers are there.
There's a lot of information about things that are happening with the CDC, the pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot of things that are not said. So there's more to this than meets the eye, believe me.
Online, you'll find there is a CDC foundation. They get a lot of money from drug manufacturers. So who is their client? Is their client the American public and the safety of drugs and vaccines, or is it the manufacturer?
The only thing we learned in school was that there was a program, okay, and that we should follow that vaccine program. As for the vaccine itself and the contents of the vaccines, no, we didn't study that. Okay, we assumed that what the pharmaceuticals, what they did, and the CDC accepted that, hey, that's the way it is.
Natural immunity is the only true immunity. Everything else is an artificial attempt to cheat nature, and nature is never cheated. If we relate to the natural world properly and treat it properly, we will have health. But if we elect to think that we can fool Mother Nature, we're only fooling ourselves.
Disclaimer: Soul Pressed is a compiled version of my own in-depth personal research. This presentation is not designed to solely attack any group or individual, but primarily the destructive beliefs that individuals themselves have yet to dispel and reconcile. Let's start at the surface. What are vaccines? Why do we get them? And what are they made of? A quick Google search of what are vaccines and why do we get them will bring you to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention website. The webpage will briefly tell us that we vaccinate for the safety of ourselves and our children, and for the protection of our future. We are taught that vaccines protect us from sickness and disease by injecting us with a diluted version of the virus to familiarize our immune system with X disease. We are also taught that by vaccinating we are able to eliminate or eradicate X disease from existence through mass vaccination. We all have at least this pretty simple understanding of the idea behind the reason vaccines are here. With all of the vaccine controversy that has gone on since the implementation of vaccines in the early 50s, this should be a sign for all of us to evaluate the vaccine epidemic for ourselves. Consider the fact that we have been given a natural immune system to interact with the natural world by the creator of nature, or God. Let's look into this. What do these vaccines consist of? Another quick Google search of vaccine ingredients brings up another CDC article titled Ingredients of Vaccines, Fact Sheet. On here we find a document titled Vaccine Ingredients Sorted by Vaccine. We will take a look at this shortly. First, let's go over to the few ingredients they list directly on their website. Aluminum is said to promote a more potent immune system response. Let's check this out, especially considering this is a heavy metal. Here is a submission in the National Library of Medicine on aluminum toxicity.
What is the risk of aluminum as a neurotoxin? Aluminum is neurotoxic, is highly biologically reactive and uniquely equipped to do damage to essential cellular biochemistry. Aluminum is present in the human brain and it accumulates with age. The most recent research demonstrates that a significant portion of individuals older than 70 years of age have a potentially pathological accumulation of aluminum somewhere in their brain.
Here is another submission to the Library of Medicine. This one specifically talking about the vaccine adjuvant, aluminum.
Aluminum vaccine adjuvants. Are they safe? Aluminum is an experimentally demonstrated neurotoxin and the most commonly used vaccine adjuvant. Despite almost 90 years of widespread use of aluminum adjuvants, medical science's understanding about their mechanisms of action is still remarkably poor. There is also a concerning scarcity of data on toxicology and pharmacokinetics of these compounds. In spite of this, the notion that aluminum in vaccines is safe and appears to be widely accepted. Experimental research, however, clearly shows that aluminum adjuvants have a potential to induce serious immunological disorders in humans. In particular, aluminum in adjuvant form carries a risk for autoimmunity, long-term brain inflammation, and associated neurological complications, and may thus have profound and widespread adverse health consequences. The possibility that vaccine benefits may have been overrated and the risk of potential adverse effects underestimated has not been rigorously evaluated in the medical and scientific community. We hope that the present paper will provide a framework for a much needed and long overdue assessment of this highly contentious medical issue.
Another article on aluminum toxicity by Winchester Health. They claim exposure to low amounts of aluminum is safe, but enough of it is toxic. Is this accounting for aluminum that is injected into the bloodstream of developing children from the time they are born? Symptoms of aluminum exposure include confusion, muscle weakness, bone pain, deformities, fractures, seizures, speech problems, and slow growth. Complications include lung problems, nervous system problems, bone disease, brain disease and disorder, anemia, and impaired iron absorption. Of course, this would trigger a heavy immune system response. It's highly toxic, and the body knows this. Right off the bat, considering this logically, why would we need to trigger our immune system with a potent neurotoxin anyways? Wouldn't the virus itself generate a sufficient immune system response?
Recently, we've been looking at aluminum, which is common to many vaccines. It's used as an adjuvant that means helper. Without the aluminum, the vaccine basically does not provide any long-term protection. And so my research has looked at injectable aluminum and how it might impact the nervous system. Of taking the same stuff out of the vaccines, the aluminum hydroxide, and injecting it into mice, into the muscles, to see what would happen if we tried to mimic the vaccine schedule. We were quite surprised to see how rapidly the behavioral symptoms emerged. They showed not only behavioral deficits of motor function, but they ultimately showed cognitive deficits as well. And once we sacrificed the animals and started looking inside their brains and spinal cords, we found massive damage to motor neurons. And so we may be creating the conditions for Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's disease.
So we were able to do two things. We were able to measure how much aluminium is in the brain of individuals who died with autism, but also we were able to look at the aluminium in the tissue using a microscopy technique called fluorescence. The amount of aluminium in the brain tissue was, I would say, extraordinarily high, very high. My group has measured the aluminium content of probably more than 100 human brains. And these brain tissues taken from the individuals with the diagnosis of autism were some of the highest we've measured, bar none. The only ones we've seen of a similar were a recent study in familial Alzheimer's.
Aluminum is not considered particularly toxic by the FDA. In fact, it's registered as GRAS, generally regarded as safe. And yet there are thousands of scientific articles that show it's a neurotoxin. That is, it kills or injures nerves.
Next on their list of common substances is antibiotics. No specific antibiotic, just generalized antibiotic. I will not dwell too deep into these. They claim they are included to prevent bacteria from growing in the bowels. Antibiotics have been known to cause more harm than they help if not taken correctly, especially chemical-based antibiotics. If you're eating a nutritious plant-based diet, you get all of the natural antibiotics that you need. Antibiotics not only kill bad bacteria in cells, but also good bacteria in cells, hence its name antibiotic or anti-life. Next on the list is egg protein. A general term, egg protein. After looking deeper into this, I discovered these dairy proteins were casein and choline, two carcinogenic proteins found in milk and egg products. Here is an article from Livestrong on casein.
In the China study, Dr. T. Colin Campbell explains the apparent link between the occurrence of cancer and consumption of animal protein. What he was able to find was that casein, which is 85% of the protein in dairy, promoted cancer in all stages of its development. He concluded that the only safe protein was plant-derived protein. The amount of cancer growth could be controlled based on the amount of casein in the diets of laboratory animals. This indicates that cancer could be avoided by shunning animal proteins, specifically casein. Casein is thick, coarse, and often used to form the strongest glue known to man. It's also a strong mucus-forming substance. There is 300% more casein in cow's milk than in human milk. Due to this high amount of casein in the diet, the human respiratory system can become clogged and irritated. When the respiratory system becomes clogged and irritated, your body is more susceptible to hay fever, asthma, bronchitis, sinusitis, colds, runny noses, ear infections, and the common allergy to dairy.
Now a submission on choline and prostate cancer risk in the Library of Medicine.
Meat, milk, and eggs have been inconsistently associated with the risk of advanced prostate cancer. These foods are sources of choline, a nutrient that may affect prostate cancer progression through cell membrane function and 1-carbon metabolism. No study has examined dietary choline and the risk of lethal prostate cancer. Men in the highest quintile of choline intake had a 70% increased risk of lethal prostate cancer. Choline intake was associated with an increased risk of lethal prostate cancer.
Interesting. Another carcinogenic compound commonly used in the injections. This also means that the dairy and egg products have cancer-causing proteins.
I said, oh my gosh, casein, if we use the criteria that is used for determining what's a carcinogen, casein is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. Make no mistake about it. What we learned along the way, we could turn on and turn off cancer. Turn it on by increasing casein consumption, turn it off by decreasing or replacing it with plant protein. That was a really exciting thing, that we could take nutrition and turn cancer on and off. I mean, that was pretty startling.
Researchers at the Cleveland Clinic found dietary choline, found predominantly in eggs, milk, liver, red meat, poultry, and fish. After it is converted in our gut to trimethylamine, oxidized in our liver to form trimethylamine oxide, may contribute to plaque buildup in people's arteries and set us up for heart disease, stroke, death, and if that's not bad enough, open heart surgery.
Let's move on. Next on the list is formaldehyde, used to inactivate bacteria in vaccines. Formaldehyde is a common industrial chemical used in many building materials and household products. Here is a submission on formaldehyde posted by the American Cancer Society. We're not going to review this whole document. The beginning just explains the several studies that have been done on animals and people for the evaluation of its carcinogenic effects. The real gold is at the end.
The National Toxicology Program is formed from parts of several different U.S. government agencies including the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Food and Drug Administration. The NTP lists formaldehyde as, quote, known to be a human carcinogen, end quote. This research is supported and backed up in findings by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Cancer Institute, among others.
Insane. Another carcinogenic chemical with severe health effects that is openly admitted to being used. So far, everything we have gone over has had severe adverse health effects on human beings.
Formaldehyde, synonym morbicid. Potential acute health effects, very hazardous in case of eye contact, hazardous in case of skin contact, corrosive. Severe overexposure can result in death. Mutagenic effects, mutagenic for mammalian somatic cells. The substance may be toxic to kidneys, liver, skin, central nervous system. Repeated or prolonged exposure to the substance can produce target organs damage. Exposure to formaldehyde and methanol may cause adverse reproductive effects and birth defects. Exposure to formaldehyde may cause cancer, may cause irreversible eye damage, may also affect metabolism, behavior / central nervous system, excitement, central nervous system depression, convulsions, stupor, aggression, headache, weakness, dizziness, drowsiness, coma. Ingestion, harmful if swallowed, may be fatal. Causes gastrointestinal irritation with nausea, vomiting, possibly with blood, diarrhea, severe pain in mouth, throat, and stomach, and possible corrosive injury to the gastrointestinal mucosa, ulceration, or bleeding from stomach. Use, used as a disinfectant, biocide, and in manufacture of phenolic resins and adhesives. Do you see a pattern here? Many of the health effects of formaldehyde are identical to the neurological side effects observed in vaccine victims: vomiting, gastrointestinal tract irritation, reproductive effects and birth defects, damage to vision, organ damage, and so on. And that's just one of the many neurotoxic additives the CDC admits are intentionally added to vaccines.
Moving on. The next common ingredient in vaccines is monosodium glutamate, or MSG. Let's read what the University Health News has to say about MSG.
MSG side effects, brain damage and chemical changes. Additional dangers to infants and prenatal subjects include brain damage. This damage leads to convulsions and seizures during infancy. Equally frightening are the following chemical changes that occur in the body as a result of ingesting MSG. Adiponectin, a protein that helps the body regulate blood sugar and energy expenditure, is lowered by nearly 60%. This causes an increase in blood sugar levels and a decrease in metabolism, a combination that can trigger weight gain and food cravings. Leptin becomes unrecognizable to the brain. This chemical messenger is normally released by fat cells and then travels to the brain to deliver the signal to stop eating. However, in people who consume MSG, receptors in the brain become incapable of receiving this signal, despite its increased production by fat cells. This leads to an increased appetite. In the liver, MSG causes the inflammation of blood vessels and the destruction of red blood cells and the death of liver cells. Studies also indicate that it stimulates the creation of chemicals that are responsible for inflammation. As an additional consideration, most MSG-laden foods are also dangerously high in trans fats. Studies indicate that this combination of MSG and trans fats can cause the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The result: a condition in which fat is deposited inside the liver and is thought to lead to cirrhosis. Fatty liver disease also triggers insulin resistance, resulting in high blood sugar and blood insulin levels. This type of insulin resistance is the same as that which occurs in type 2 diabetes. In both cases, insulin is being produced and sent into the bloodstream, but body cells are unable to use it effectively. This prevents glucose from passing into cells, resulting in high blood sugar, decreased energy, and increased appetite. Taste receptors on tongue cells are similar to glutamate receptors in brain cells. This is why MSG has a stimulatory side effect on the brain and why it can damage the brain cells of newborns. Research has established that MSG side effects also include headaches and significant spikes in blood pressure. It is also noted that the body does not become tolerant to these effects over time, meaning that chronic use of MSG will continue to cause them.
Once again, another dangerous toxin found not only in vaccines, but again in foods many believe are safe. Are you seeing the pattern?
You've been hearing about a silent killer. It's a killer that's worse than alcohol, worse than nicotine, worse than drugs. It's called monosodium glutamate. And most people don't know that MSG is in thousands of processed food, often under hidden name, probably in your kitchen cabinets. And now some doctors say this flavor booster could be boosting your weight.
Hardly anyone in the general public has ever heard the word excitotoxin. And that's not by accident. It's because the number one source of excitotoxins in our society is in your food. And it's not in your natural foods, it's being added to your food by the industry that processes food. And they're adding it in very large concentrations.
Last on this list is thimerosal, a mercury-containing preservative. Here's an article posted by Children's Health Defense, debunking the myths of thimerosal.
What is thimerosal? Thimerosal is a mercury-based preservative used in vaccines and other medicines. Thimerosal is about 50% ethyl mercury by weight. Thimerosal exposure has been linked to attention disorders, speech delays, language delays, Tourette's syndrome, misery disorder, seizures, epilepsy, sudden infant death syndrome, narcolepsy, heart disorders, neurological disorders, asthma, and allergies. Over 165 peer-reviewed scientific studies show a link between thimerosal and neurological injuries. My doctor says vaccines don't contain mercury anymore, that the thimerosal has been phased out. Thimerosal has not been removed from childhood vaccines. In 2001, the Institute of Medicine reviewed the use of thimerosal-containing vaccines in neurodevelopmental disorders and recommended that thimerosal be removed from vaccines administered to sensitive populations. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices chose not to follow the recommendations of the Institute of Medicine.
Mercury? This is considered one of the most dangerous neurotoxins in the world. Everything listed on the CDC's website is a known toxin to the human body, and none of them are any virus or disease. Just from looking at this, it would seem one would rather take any chance at getting whatever sickness you might get, rather than willingly getting these extremely toxic compounds injected into them. Again, consider we have an immune system for a reason. How could adding more deadly toxins to a virus possibly in any logical situation make the virus less potent or less harmful than the natural version, if one even exists. Let's look deeper. Section 2. Vaccine inserts, the vaccine autism link, and corruption at the highest levels of authority. First, let's quickly review what we have already gone over. We have concluded that there are in fact poisonous substances inside of the vaccines, and the research supports it, as well as the CDC openly admitting to using them. We went over aluminum, the heavy metal neurotoxic adjuvant which triggers a heavy immune system response, has been found concentrated in people's minds that have been diagnosed with autism, dementia, and Alzheimer's. It is a known neurotoxin. We went over casein and choline, two carcinogenic proteins found in milk and egg products. Both have been scientifically demonstrated to cause mutation in cells and heart disease. Formaldehyde, a chemical used in building material and household cleaning products, proven to be a human carcinogen and mutagen, and proven to cause neurological damage to the nervous system. MSG, a commonly used addicting food flavoring excitotoxin that triggers a neurological reaction and overstimulates brain receptors to the point of nerve death, causing severe damage to the nervous system. Antimarisol, a mercury-based preservative, mercury being the most potent neurotoxin known to man. Note that most of these chemicals are targeting the immune and nervous system. The nervous system connects your entire body to your brain. It is everything you can perceive through thought, feeling, taste, smell, touch, sight, and hearing. Consider these neurotoxins working with each other, and the profound amount of damage that such a concoction of chemicals could cause. Know that there are no safe levels of poison to put into your body. Poison is poison. Let's move on. Back to the CDC fact sheet. They have a 3-page PDF document listing vaccine ingredients by vaccine. Let's take a look at this. I'm not going to dig into all these ingredients, but according to this sheet, there are even more toxic ingredients than what was shown on the previous webpage, including but not limited to dead animal and human DNA, which contains decaying and cancer-ridden cells that bind to your DNA and cause mutation, and polysorbate 80, which opens the blood-brain barrier and allows things that would otherwise be blocked from entering the brain to enter the brain. Things like aluminum, mercury, MSG, formaldehyde, and other carcinogens. It's stated that these ingredients come directly from the vaccine package insert, from the vaccine manufacturer, the source information. Let's take a look at some of these. We're going to take a look at the Pentacell vaccine, which is the Tdap and polio combo vaccine. I'm not going to read the entire insert or we would be here a while, but I have highlighted sections of importance. We will look at the contraindications or the medical advisories from the producer on why you should not use these. Encephalopathy and progressive neurological disorder or brain damage, and damage to the nervous system. This includes coma, decreased level of consciousness, prolonged seizures, infantile spasms, uncontrolled epilepsy, and progressive encephalopathy, or progressive brain damage. Here's a look at the adverse reactions chart. A very high percentage of adverse reactions, especially in the decreased activity/lethargy. Lethargy meaning a pathological state of deep unresponsiveness or sleepiness. Here's the full list of recorded adverse reactions. Horrid reactions to these injections that degrade the body 360 degrees. It isn't surprising after reviewing what these are made up of. Here's another shocker. Section 13 of any vaccine insert. Has not been evaluated for carcinogenic and mutagenic potential or potential to impair fertility. Why? Why have these not been tested for these potentials? Why does the CDC and World Health Organization claim these are safe and effective and include several toxins and have not had any studies done on the harmful effects that could come from it? Things are not lining up here. All of the vaccination inserts are very similar, while varying slightly. But all of them list the toxic ingredients. All of them list the incredible amount of adverse reactions. All of them state in Section 13 that the injections have not been tested for cancer-causing and mutation potential. It's not difficult to conclude that something is off here, something apparently so toxic being classified as safe by multiple government-owned corporations. Now let's get into the topic that has everyone arguing and fighting over when it comes to vaccines. The vaccine autism link. Before we can understand this, we must understand what is in the vaccines, and we must understand what autism is. Autism is a neurological and neurodevelopmental disorder with various learning and behavioral disabilities. Individuals who are autistic have a hard time understanding themselves and in turn have a difficult time connecting or relating with others. People who experience symptoms of autism typically have a hard time understanding that other people have a whole entire perception with thoughts, feelings, ideas, and attitudes based off of their own individual experience, as referred to in the theory of mind. Autism is considered a spectrum disorder, meaning that the symptoms vary widely. Some autists are able to function in their day-to-day lives while others are not able to perform simple tasks. Autism starts at a young age and is caused by neurodevelopmental disruptions in an early developing individual. Neurotoxins in the vaccines are administered even before birth. Consider that autism is just varying levels and severities of brain and neurological damage, or encephalopathy. The claim does not seem far-fetched at all that vaccines could and are playing a role in the autism epidemic. The CDC says the autism rate is about 1 in 59, while other sources are saying it is as close to 1 in 2, and anywhere in between. If you haven't yet, take a look at how autistic society is as a collective. It is very scary. Most are experiencing the effects of autism and have yet to see it because of how normalized the autistic state of being and living is. When someone generally thinks of autism, they think of children or adults who are not able to function normally on their own and have more severe brain damage. But most grown men and women cannot interact with each other face to face. They do not understand their own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and are in a broken, childlike state mentally and spiritually. Most only capable of talking about surface-level materialistic things, nothing deep and organic from the heart and soul. Most do not use their minds at all and are completely influenced by outside sources. It gets scarier too. The damage of vaccines has been known by many in the private sectors of the health and pharmaceutical industries for many years. Dr. William Thompson, senior scientist at the CDC, came out and testified, saying in 2004 he played a part in falsifying data to send to the Journal of Pediatrics regarding the significant findings on autism and vaccines. What he uncovered broke into the mainstream media for a while and has been covered extensively in the film Vaxxed, as well as in many other places.
Pharma controls the minds of those in the medical community, and the medical community prescribes what pharma has on the shelves for them to prescribe. Since pharma plays a role and continues to play a role in the causation of the autism epidemic, they have done nothing to help facilitate appropriate treatment. Pharma is still causing autism to break out all over the world because one of the key triggers is the heavy metal exposure that children receive from vaccinations, specifically mercury. And the vaccines that are exported to third world countries have the full complement of the mercury-laden preservative thimerosal in those vaccines. No one holds pharma accountable for what they put in vaccines or verifies what they put in vaccines, and they have complete immunity for whatever happens to those who receive those vaccines. Some of the ingredients that we know are in vaccines are heavy metals, aluminum, mercury, MSG, and aborted fetal tissue, chopped up cancer cells. But some of the things that are not on the label include reverse transcriptase and retroviruses that are known to cause cancer in animals. So what ends up happening, if you happen to be unlucky, is the DNA from those retroviruses get written into your own DNA by the reverse transcriptase. Prevailing medical opinion scientifically links vaccines to encephalopathy or brain damage, but not scientifically to autism. And that is because it serves certain factions to hide the fact that autism is an encephalopathy.
Hear this well.
Hear this well. Please hear this well.
Hear this well.
Vaccine can and do cause autism.
My grandson, daughter Lily,
and my daughter. My son was fully vaccinated.
My son Jackson.
I had a healthy, typically developing boy.
Please hear this well.
Vaccines cause autism.
One day everyone will know the truth about vaccines.
We're going to take a look at the Simpson-Wood transcripts. A secret meeting held by the CDC in June of 2000 that was made public under the Freedom of Information Act. In this meeting, many doctors, scientists, and officials from the CDC and other health agencies came together to discuss the vaccine epidemic and to go over the details concerning the toxicity of vaccinations. I'm going to review some of the important findings in these transcripts. The full document will be available on e1337.world.
There is a very limited pharmacokinetic data concerning ethyl mercury. There is very limited data on its blood levels. There is no data on its excretion. It is recognized to both cross-placenta and the blood-brain barrier. The data on its toxicity, ethyl mercury, is sparse. It is primarily recognized as a cause of hypersensitivity. Acutely, it can cause neurologic and renal toxicity, including death from overdose.
Limited studies have been funded on ethyl mercury, the primary ingredient thimerosal, known to cross the placenta and the blood-brain barrier. The data that does exist supports that ethyl mercury is a cause of hypersensitivity and neurological toxicity, and can lead to death.
Aluminum and mercury are often simultaneously administered to infants, both at the same site and at different sites. However, we also learned that there is absolutely no data, including animal data, about the potential for synergy, additivity, or antagonism, all of which can occur in binary metal mixtures that relate and allow us to draw any conclusions from the simultaneous exposure to these two salts in vaccines.
Absolutely no data, including animal data, on the toxic potential of mixing metals in the body. Consider how mercury interacts with aluminum outside of the body. It's pretty corrosive.
The second point I can make is that in relationship to aluminum, being a nephrologist for a long time, the potential for aluminum in central nervous system toxicity was well established by dialysis data. To think there isn't some possible problem here is unreal.
It is very unreal to dismiss any of the neurotoxins contained in vaccines for being a reason for the mass amounts of neurological disorders across the world. Like I've said before, aluminum is proven to cause neurological damage and is normally expelled by the body very quickly because of its toxicity, but in adjuvant form it sticks around and passes into the brain and placenta.
Now for the outcomes. We looked at the neurologic and mental outcomes and we classified them into major categories. One of those is neurologic developmental disorders. Sometimes we refer to this category as NDD. In this category, we have all the outcomes that received any of these codes, which are on this slide. I will not go over all of them, but they include such things as autism, stammering, and tics. The largest group in here is under 315. That includes such things as speech and language disorders and coordination disorders. There is a very small group of mental retardation.
In their own words, they link the injections to autism and a variety of other neurological disorders. Still, while all of them being the same thing, brain damage or encephalopathy.
Exposure at 3 months of age, tics. Exposure at 6 months of age, an attention deficit disorder. Exposure at 1, 3, and 6 months of age, language and speech delays, which are 2 separate ICD-9 codes. Exposure at 1, 3, and 6 months of age, the entire category of neurodevelopmental delays, which includes all of these plus a number of other disorders.
Once again, just another example of them openly discussing the toxic effects of being exposed to these injections.
Dr. Egan, could you do this calculation for aluminum? Dr. Verstraeten, I did it for aluminum. Actually, that was the last thing I did last night before I left the office. I just did it for NCK because for group health it would have been more difficult to program. Actually, the results were almost identical to ethyl mercury because the amount of aluminum goes along almost exactly with the mercury one. So they are almost identical.
This is in reference to discussion that was done on studies relating to mercury toxicity. The effects of being exposed to aluminum and mercury are said to be almost identical.
But the government has had a tendency, and I don't know if they will in this case, but to rely on the industry to deal with the basics and then neurodevelopmental studies. With a little pressure, they may change their minds, but I don't know that.
So what's being said here is the government turns a blind eye and lets the industry, in this case, the vaccine manufacturers, the ones making billions by producing and selling vaccines, produce the studies on their own products and evaluate their own effectiveness and safety. This is because the federal government, the CDC, and other health agencies are primarily funded by these manufacturers, among others.
The medical legal findings in this study, casual or not, are horrendous, and therefore it is important that the suggested epidemiological, pharmacokinetic, and animal studies be performed. If an allegation was made that a child's neurobehavioral findings were caused by thimerosal-containing vaccines, you could readily find a junk scientist who would support the claim with a reasonable degree of certainty, but you will not find a scientist with any integrity who would say they refuse with the data that is available, and that is true. So we are in a bad position from the standpoint of defending any lawsuits if they were initiated, and I am concerned.
Horrendous findings revealed in their own studies. Anyone who is still supporting and defending the manufacturers and the ones who own them are in a bad position.
Then comes the but. I am really concerned that we have taken off like a boat going down one arm of the mangrove swamp at high speed, when in fact there was not enough discussion really early on about which way the boat should go at all. And I really want to risk offending everyone in the room by saying that perhaps this study should not have been done at all, because the outcome of it could have, to some extent, been predicted, and we have all reached this point now where we are leg-hanging, even though I hear the majority of the consultants say to the board that they are not convinced there is a causality direct link between thimerosal and various neurological outcomes.
It's said that the outcome of the study between neurological damage and vaccines could have been predicted, and everyone supporting this in these high positions of power are now having the fingers pointed at them. The cat is out of the bag, and it has been for a while.
And what we have here is people who have for every best reason in the world pursued a direction of research, but there is now the point at which the research results have to be handled. And even if this committee decides that there is no association and that information gets out, the work has been done, and through freedom of information that will be taken by others and will be used in other ways beyond the control of this group. And I am very concerned about that, as I suspect it is already too late to do anything regardless of any professional body and what they say.
The science has been done and proven. The holdup is the government does not want to point the finger at the ones who are writing their paychecks. In this case, the vaccine manufacturers, or as others may call it, Big Pharma. The federal government is paid heavily to promote and propagate vaccinations. The CDC is literally just a mouthpiece for pharmaceutical corporations. There are even laws in place to protect the vaccine manufacturers from any liability for damages their products cause. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 removes all liability from manufacturers for vaccine injuries. The court system you must go through when reporting a vaccine injury is not a normal court session. It is a petition with federal claims, a special session without a judge or jury, but a government-appointed courtmaster and lawyer backed by taxpayer money. The Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has admitted to paying out over $4.1 billion of taxpayer money, which is roughly $135 million a year, to children diagnosed with a wide variety of vaccine-induced neurological damage and disorder. Yet at the same time, they claim there are no connection between neurodamage and vaccines. I can assure you this only scratches the surface.
Many of the American agencies these days aren't really protecting the public. And also, we have an Environmental Protection Agency secretary who in government who isn't convinced about a lot of areas of environmental danger. So it's actually coming from the top now. But the problem is the insidious involvement of industry in all of these agencies. It's hard to trust these kinds of reports that come out saying there's no risk anymore from the Centers for Disease Control, from the Food and Drug Administration, from the Environmental Protection Agency, because they are in bed with industry. They are oftentimes peopled with, the people on their staff are ex-industry people. So there's all kinds of connections, and in many cases, they are paid for by industry. Congress has systematically lowered the funding for a lot of these agencies so that the industry itself will pick up the tab. And guess what? As a result, they have influence.
Yeah. Scientific research and statistics have now shown vaccinations to be horribly dangerous and misrepresented by manufacturers, government regulators, and healthcare providers. Millions of people have been injured or killed by vaccinations, and the only reason vaccinations are sometimes mandatory is that pharmaceutical companies have lobbied and paid corrupt legislators to pass corrupt legislation attempting to force the public to purchase and consume their products. The idea of a vaccination that will prevent disease is highly appealing, it's highly political, has caused huge amounts of money to change hands. But the actual track record of vaccinations is a road of tragedy, failure, betrayal, and permanent physical damage to millions of vaccine recipients. Many vaccines are approved without scientific and medical due diligence, poorly regulated, administered to large populations experimentally, and the resulting atrocities are played down by government and media. To make this even worse, corrupt legislators provide unprecedented immunity for vaccine manufacturers and marketers from liability for the millions of lives they have damaged and destroyed. If you are damaged in any way by vaccinations, your lawmakers have said that that is your problem. You are to take all the risk while someone else makes all the money. So the game is rigged.
The vaccine epidemic only scratches the surface of the deception that's gone on in our realm. The deception about everything we have been taught has been caught onto by many individuals for a long time. Knowledge of self and morality have been kept from the masses purposefully. It is why we are poisoned in specific ways to fracture the consciousness of every individual, to not discover the nature of ourselves as we would naturally. When this knowledge is held from others, those who do not have it can be manipulated with language, symbols, concepts, and ideas. Vaccines may be number one on the list of consciousness suppression tools being used by those who have been keeping us from ourselves for a long time. This knowledge is not taught in schools. We are not taught about our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We are not taught about consciousness and the soul. We are not taught right from wrong. We are indoctrinated with loads of beliefs, a false reality programming put into the weak and vulnerable minds of neurologically damaged children and adults. Society has been systematically dumbed down by the powers that be, powers that are above all governments. Most are so toxic from a combination of everything, and so disconnected inside that they can't coherently put together what is wrong with them, yet alone the bigger picture of what has been done to them. Most are thinking, saying, and acting off of taught belief, never feeling or considering what is taught or portrayed, and some may not even be capable. Most have been locked out by trauma that we bear from coming up in an immoral, chaotic world, where many wrongs have been allowed and have been portrayed as right, while being taken in and repeated in the lives of innocent souls. Understanding the darkness in this world can only come when you understand your own potential for your own darkness. We cannot define ourselves by our external riches, only our spiritual and internal wealth. Only one comes with us after we leave this temporary place. If you had to stand in front of God today and answer for your thoughts, words, and actions, what would you be able to say for yourself? That you had a nice house, a nice car, maybe even a family, and that you prayed? That you never saw past the surface level distractions designed to keep you from your soul and morality? I do not speak out of belief, but from a place of knowing. I can personally testify to the damage that has been done to me by vaccinations, as I was diagnosed with a high-functioning form of autism at a young age. I can personally testify that I went through 20 years of my life, through school and early adulthood, thinking I was perfectly normal, because so many others thought and acted in the same ways that I did. I went through a painful healing process, which involved shedding everything I believed to be real, inside of me and in the world around me. My mind had been fractured and compartmentalized so badly to a point to where I never realized there was anything deeper to life than the material world and my own five senses. This message is not to guide someone to pick a side, pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, but to look deeper into reality as a whole. This is just a surface level rabbit hole to hopefully open the hearts and minds of individuals who still operate in the reality paradigm that's been programmed into the consciousness of most of us. The toxins that have been produced, normalized, and taught to be okay to consume extend far greater than just vaccinations. This ties heavily into the chemical-ridden, genetically modified food, the fluoridated water, the heavy metals being sprayed into the atmosphere, and the toxic information that's pumped out of government-owned corporations and organizations, such as the mainstream media, public schools, and the churches. This suffering-based, disconnected society has gone on far too long, when there's absolutely no need for it, contrary to popular belief and teaching. It just takes the majority of people reconnecting to their hearts, their souls, and to reality, to realize that we are being soul-pressed, and to align ourselves with truth and morality at whatever cost.